Somebody's not happy today. That person is me. Science reporting has gotten so bad and something has to be done about it. This started as a Ham Bytes episode. I was looking at creationist Ken Ham and things he says, and it dragged me into a whole different area, which is going to lead me to talk about the poor job that science reporters do and how it's getting worse with AI. All right, so I'm going to show you how I got into this, and then I'm going to take you through a couple popular news sites, and then we'll look at the original article, and we'll just see how contorted the story gets. And my biggest frustration is because science reporting is so bad. All right, there are many people who learn all their science sometimes from science reporters, right? From the popular press. They think that's what science is. And so science reporters that don't accurately represent the actual science are doing a tremendous misservice to the entire community and doing a lot of damage. Now, there's a lot of blame to go around. I mean, part of the blame falls on the scientists themselves. Dolly came up with this little figure for me to represent how some scientists are in front of the camera, in front of the public, as they're asked questions about what they do and what the meaning of the research is like, I don't know, I can't explain it. Like, it's too complicated. How am I supposed to explain it to you? All right. And therefore, because they're poor communicators to themselves of their actual science, they might be able to communicate to another PhD, another scientist what they're doing, but they can't communicate to the general public and to others who would like to know what science is and are actually trying to communicate it themselves. And so what is done then, of course, is where does the communication of science come from? Well, it comes from the newsroom, right? You get a reporter, or you have an institution that has their own PR person who then talks to their faculty and gets the story from them and then presents or puts out a public relations memo about this current great finding we have. And of course, what they're trying to do is they're trying to promote the university, right? Their job is to make everything look good, to make every little tiny thing that we do, that I do in the lab, make it sound like it's the most profound thing that's ever happened. Because, give us some more money. We need more grants. And I get it. I get that job, of putting a good face on what we do. But that shouldn't include extreme exaggerations. Sometimes it's not exaggeration. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's these folks don't really understand the science. And we're such bad communicators with the PR person, and we don't really take it seriously that we give the wrong impression. And you know what? Scientists themselves want to portray what they're doing is really important, right? They want to make it sound like they want to feel like they're doing something really important. And many times they are, but we tend to over accentuate. We tend to over represent what we do. And it's just a natural human behavior. But this is going to get amplified, right? I think that my work's really, really great. And so here's what I did. But here's the big picture of how it fits in. And here's how, this is a really important, crucial step. This is an important little detail that I found that's going to revolutionize the whole field that I'm in. And then the person who's talking to me about this hears that, and they go, and guess what they do? They embellish that a little bit more, right? They put out a PR statement from the institution. That then goes out to the world, and then other popular news sites pick up on it and they edit it, right? They massage it a little bit too, right? To make it even more clickbaity so that their news sites will get more clicks and more interest. And so it's like, once again, re-amplified. It's like a game, what telephone? You pass one thing along, and the story changes. In this case, the story becomes more and more grandiose as it gets passed around. And there are many news sites that try hard to try hard to be accurate. There are other sites, accuracy is not really that important. It's more important that, we're using this information to generate income. And so we're not as concerned about the absolute details here. I'm going to blame it on the PR person from the university. Okay, that's my little mini rant to begin with. Now let me try to back it up with an actual example to show you why I'm so frustrated. Okay, to do so, we got to start at the beginning of this particular story. Like how did this percolate up to the point where I got to the boiling point and just had to say something about it? All right, I read this short article by Ken Ham, right? So Ken Ham, for those who don't know, is the I'll just say he's the most popular spokesperson of popular level young Earth creationism, right? So what he says has a lot of influence, right? Millions of eyeballs going to be on types of things that he says on this particular website. So here we have the title, Evolution Isn't Random, ? New study challenges decades of scientific understanding. Well, we got a revolution on our hands, right? And then he has a picture of the front page of the article that he's going to look at or quote from. We're going to go there in a moment. Earth.com. Paradigm shift. Paradigm shift. Yeah, that means we're making whatever we thought we knew, like how we had the comprehensive view we had of a particular thing, a theory, like evolutionary theory. We're having a paradigm shift now. What we thought we knew, we don't know anymore, and we need to change our thinking. So evolution is not as random as we thought. When I see the word random, and then I find out random is not defined, but I know that young Earth creationists have a particular view of random. This type of article just feeds right into their own thinking about randomness. And it's just like laying it on a platter, right? This article just lays out on a platter for them easy pickings in terms of like picking out an article to like make their point that, all right, evolution's on the rocks. They're always changing their minds, paradigm shifts. Clearly what we thought yesterday isn't true. And now we got a new idea. Well, if what everyone said was true yesterday isn't true anymore, then what we believe today might not be true to the next day. All right. That's going to be their big takeaway from this. All right. So that's a problem with having such a clickbaity, vague title. And of course, we're going to go look at the original article and see, did the original article actually talk about evolution not being random? And what did they mean by that? But let's first take a quick look at what Ken Ham has to say. One of the hallmarks of evolutionary thought is that evolution is a process of random chance processes. But a new study, that's what we thought. But now this new study referred to by the popular press. See, Ken Ham is a slave to social media and popular press articles because he never digs. One of my big criticisms, honestly, I'm not going to criticize Ken Ham much today in this episode of Ham Bytes. I'm not criticizing him because he's not clearly all at fault here, right? I'm gonna give my usual criticism, which is, so I said I'm not going to criticize him, but I'll give you my usual criticism that's in almost every episode of Ham Bytes, and that is he doesn't go to the original literature and truly try to understand what the original author's intent was. He takes the word of social media and popular press as being an accurate reflection of the original work. And that, of course, always leads him far astray from the truth. And so, yes, he's guilty of that. However, he's, in a way, I'm more upset with the popular media here than I am with Ken Ham, because they have created a Ken Ham, right? They have created misconceptions, which then feed into those who play on those misconceptions and are easily played by those misconceptions. Like Ken Ham is easily fooled by these misconceptions. Now, Ken Ham's actually referring to, he had a couple people from his organization, Answers in Genesis, which did a Facebook news program, and they talked about this article. I went and watched that. It's pretty clear to me that none of them had read the original paper. They also looked at the popular press articles, and they simply riff off of those without digging deeper. All right, well, okay. Suggested that maybe evolution isn't as random as we thought. What the world do they mean by that? So get ready for the details of this latest installment of Everything We Previously Thought About Evolution is Wrong. Yes, this happens a lot. See, that's the way they take these types of things. There's a paradigm shift. Well, that means your paradigm before has to shift. Well, that means what you thought was right before has to be changed. Whatever you thought was right before is wrong. And you're reformulating everything. Then he tries to explain what's happening in this article. He's quoting from this actual article here itself that we'll go to. And then he sums it up by saying, despite the headlines, this study doesn't have anything to do with observed evolution, but has everything to do with God's design, even the smallest of creatures. Notes that bacteria are still bacteria. They haven't really changed. Sort of the regular boilerplate stuff. We don't need to deal with that. We're just going to deal with the big idea of, is this a paradigm shift? Is evolution not as random as we thought? What does that mean? All right, let's go to earth.com and check out what they have to say. Spoiler alert, because I got to keep you interested. This is where the AI thing comes in. All right, didn't expect I was going to talk about artificial intelligence and ChatGPT, but here we go, because it's going to enter the fray. And I'm even going to use it myself for you to do a little demo of what's happening and where science reporting is going even farther off the rails than it's been the last few years. Okay, here we are at earth.com. I knew nothing of this particular website. Nature, Science, Life, News. I did do a little bit of background research, so I looked it up on sort of these sites that sort of look at fairness and accuracy and so forth and grade them, and they're graded to be reasonably accurate and sort of moderate middle of the road. They're not hard leaning right, hard leaning left, and so forth. They might be slight left leaning, but that's because of more of an environmental maybe approach to some of their articles. But overall, the overall sense is that this isn't like fake news site. However, I'm going to take issue with this particular article, right? And so this is the one that Ken Ham read, and then apparently he gave to his news team to talk about on Answers News, which is a video that then goes on YouTube, and it'll have tens of thousands of views at a minimum. Paradigm shift. Evolution is not as random as we thought. That is a bold title by Eric Rawls. I looked up Eric Rawls. Turns out he's one of the founders of earth.com. Doesn't have much of a science background. He's from a oil and gas company, all right, drilling company is where some of his money comes from. And he has an interest, but he does have very much of an interest in the environment, but none of his education is in like languages and some other things in business, right? Not a science education. So he's taking on describing a key finding or a new understanding. Actually, it's not going to be, as you're going to see when I look at the paper, it's not a new understanding at all. There's nothing, I found nothing stunning or amazing, or it didn't change anything about what I thought beforehand when I read the article. I found the article interesting, and I thought it was a useful article, and I appreciated what they found, but it's not revolutionary. It is not a paradigm shift, right? Well, okay. So anyway, we've got paradigm shift. We have an author that doesn't know science, but he's reframing a story to bring it to his particular audience, right? And he's claiming authorship, and there's nothing at the bottom that suggests that he's editing or using any kind of aids to do what he's doing here. In a landmark discovery that challenges decades of scientific understanding. Wow, I got to read this article. This is really important stuff. Decades of scientific understanding are going to be possibly completely upheaved. A new study has revealed that evolution is not as random as previously believed. The research suggests that more predictable pattern of evolution, opening doors to unprecedented advancements in various fields, including medicine, synthetic biology, and environmental science. Now, here's where my ears perked up. This study was led by an esteemed team of researchers, including Professor James McNerney, Bevan, and the School of Life Sciences at the University of Nottingham. Wow. Esteemed team. Now, in science writing, we generally don't use words like that. And you might say, well, this is a popular article. I'm going to save the word esteem for people that have Nobel Prizes and stuff like that. I'm not saying these people are slouches, but esteemed is a little over the top. And just, here's where I'm going with this. Esteemed is a word that ChatGPT kind of likes to use sometimes, right? It's not your typical word, but it's a word that it often likes to toss in. So I'm like a little suspicious of this article. It's a little over the top in terms of its praise, how wonderful this stuff is. Predictable evolution versus random evolution. The experts meticulously analyzed the pangenome. We'll get to some of this stuff. We're not going to go in the weeds in terms of what this article is. I mean, this article is above my head, but I can at least give you a sense of what the overall gist of it is. And we don't need to even get the gist of it here. I'm going to say this stuff is relatively benign because it's a bunch of quotes. And I'll show you the origin of the quotes. I checked the origin of the quotes because I wanted to know whether the quotes had been manipulated or something dropped out or anything had been changed. But the quotes are the quotes, okay? Not disputing that. We got far-reaching implications. Then we have key takeaways on random evolution. I'm not going to talk about the random thing yet. Like what is the definition of random here? Because we're talking about science communication right now. We're talking about how the article is written and how faithful it is to the original person who made the PR statement that this is based on. And then how that PR person represents the original article, right? We're working our way back. We've seen the end result of miscommunication, which is Kenny Ham. And now we're kind of working our way backwards to the original article. And so now as we work through this article, I'm just going to look at the elements that are included here. So we had this section which described the research. They have far-reaching implications, key takeaways on random evolution. In summary, the important research presents significant opportunities in several fields. Scientists are now capable of designing synthetic genomes, which provide structured approach to manipulating genetic information. A breakthrough in novel genome design in a fight against antibiotic resistance, blah, 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 blah. Additional study offers valuable insights into climate change mitigation, blah, blah, blah. Lastly, in the medical field, the predictability of gene interactions could lead to substantial advancements, blah, blah, blah. Where's the key takeaways on random evolution? Haven't even defined what random evolution is. And there's nothing in here about randomness. This is about the fact that you can find patterns, which are something that speaks to something not being completely random. The fact that patterns can be found and predictions can be made about the pattern of how evolution will proceed does result in us being able to make predictions about the future, which allows us to see how organisms might adapt, which helps us develop medicines and all kinds of these different things. I don't know if that's not a key takeaway on random evolution. That's a bad title. I don't know what this author was thinking here. Again, what you're saying, this author doesn't know science really very well. I would doubt that he really has any deep understanding of evolutionary theory. So I'm not really sure what's going on here with the key takeaways of evolution. And then we've got more about random evolution. As discussed above, evolution, a cornerstone of modern biological sciences, offers a compelling explanation for the diversity of life on Earth. Evolution fundamentally is the process by which different kinds of living organisms are thought to have developed and diversified from earlier forms during the history of Earth. The theory posits that all species, where's the random? This is more about evolution. But he's putting the word random in front of evolution. More about random evolution. So what's described here is random evolution? No, it's a description of evolutionary theory, right? Which within that theory has a certain component within it that says there are aspects of the way the natural world functions that include random events. But the process of evolution overall is not a random thing. I think he has no idea what he's talking about here. He thinks he's describing this original paper, but this is nonsense right here. This paragraph has nothing to do with random, right? He's just describing evolution, and there's nothing in this paragraph that describes anything random. And then what do we get in this article? We get this description of what are the mechanisms of evolution. And we've got the 4 mechanisms of evolution: natural selection, genetic mutation, gene flow, and genetic drift. Great. Then those are reasonable descriptions. By the way, genetic drift. There's a change in the frequency of existing gene variant in the population due to random sampling of organisms It's a stochastic mechanism that can cause significant changes in small populations. He's saying that this is a mechanism by which organisms change their allele frequencies, and that is a stochastic mechanism. Some people would use the word random there. It's a certain form of randomness or a way of measuring that. But that's not at all what this paper has to do with. It doesn't have anything to do with it. It's actually talking about the possibility that genetic drift could explain this, but it's saying genetic drift isn't the most important force at work in explaining the phenomena that we're looking at, which are deep networks. We're saying that it looks like natural selection is more important for that. That is not a paradigm shift, because we already know about genetic drift. We already know about natural selection. We already know that there's an interplay between the two, right? There's no paradigm shifts going on here. And then there's a section below that on evidence supporting evolution. So in this article, paradigm shift, evolution is not as random as we thought. Now we're getting like this basic Bio 101 description of evidence supporting evolution, the fossil record, comparative anatomy, molecular biology, biogeography, nothing to do with randomness, nothing to do with the idea of random versus non-random. Impact of evolution on society. The concept of evolution has profound implications. In science, it provides a framework for understanding the history of life, the development of antibiotic resistance, and genetic bases of diseases. Challenges and misconceptions. Evolution faces challenges and misconceptions. Some argue that it's due to religious or philosophical beliefs. Others misunderstand aspects of the theory, such as the role of randomness in evolution. I forgot I read this before. Others misunderstand aspects of the theory, such as the role of randomness in evolution, or the misconception that evolution has a goal. Those are two misconceptions that Ken Ham has. That's a misconception that Ken Ham makes reading this article. Like, all of these things are true statements. They're a nice description of the overall, like, hey, this is a big overview of evolutionary theory, of its mechanisms and why it's important. So what's going on here? Like what you read, subscribe to our newsletter, that's it. All right. Doesn't say anything here about what the original source of this, the information in this article is. It does have a link to the original paper. But this is actually that most of the text at the top here is just reworked text from the PR statement from the University of Nottingham, right? That they provided for, popular news outlets to use. And what news outlets do is they usually take that and they kind of like, shift it around some. They might shorten it or maybe slightly lengthen it by adding some information. This particular article adds a whole bunch. This whole lower section on what is evolution is like an info thing that has little to do with the actual research paper and the findings. Now, what does this remind you of? I know what I think. Right when I read this article and I got to especially the bottom section and I saw these bullet points, or they're labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, but this is exactly what ChatGPT does. This is exactly the output that ChatGPT would write if you asked it to do a summary of like some kind of research paper and then like write a general summary overview for a popular audience who just needs to know some basic principles. This is what AI would write. This to me feels so much like AI. Like I just don't think of a person writing an article in this manner, and this person doesn't show the ability to understand evolution well enough to summarize this particular paper and this particular research well. The whole thing with random, it just is nonsensical throughout this. And then to have these very, I'll say, concise, articulate statements about what evolution is, describing it as a theory, and then writing about the mechanisms, and then writing out what some support is, and then writing a lay level response to like why it's important. This is AI all over. Now, I can't swear to that. I can't prove it because it's really hard to prove AI writing. You might just write just like AI, but it seems very unlikely. Okay, now, with that said, let's back up a little bit farther And let's look at other news outlets and see what they've done with the same information. All right, let's look at Science Daily. They're reporting on the same article from the University of Nottingham. Evolution is not as random as previously thought. Now they're using a very similar title. They're using a phrase that comes from one of the quotes. It's not like paradigm shift. All right, no, but evolution is not as random as previously thought. And I'll say that this is a accurate representation of one of the findings of the paper, but it's not surprising. It's not unknown. They just show it in a little bit different way than anyone else has before. Again, it's not a shocking statement. It's not like we didn't know this before. This is just yet another example. A groundbreaking study. It's groundbreaking in that it's a heck of a lot of work. They pulled together a whole bunch of data from a whole bunch of genomes, and so more than anyone's done. So yes, it's groundbreaking in the sense that they've got more data. They've got more data to show something that I think everybody kind of suspected was true, but hadn't actually shown yet in this particular group of organisms, E. coli. So that's groundbreaking. Don't think groundbreaking as in like upsetting the apple cart, as in this is a brand new paradigm groundbreaking. The study challenges the long-standing belief about the unpredictability of evolution. All right, there's this general idea that it's hard to predict what will happen in the future because there's so many variables, right? And that there are random forces, there are mutations that happen and there's perturbations in nature, in the environment. And so if you can say like it's easy to kind of look backwards and see like how coyotes and wolves came from a common ancestry and see that in their genomes and so forth. But if you want to predict what's a coyote going to look like in 10,000 or 100,000 years, that's a little hard to do, right? What's going to happen to its genome? Well, normally we'd say like there's going to be mutations. Every generation of every organism, as you copy your genome, you make a couple of mistakes. There's going to be variation. And that's going to add up, right? It's going to gradually change that organism. And since some of those mutations are random with respect to where you can kind of predict where they're going to happen, how can you know what the genome's going to look like in the future? But you also know generally what the environmental conditions may be. But if you don't know all the environmental conditions, that makes it hard to predict too. What this paper looks at, I'm getting ahead of myself. What the paper looks at is they look at if you have lots and lots of shifts in a genome, like in a bacteria, and you have genes coming in, genes coming out, we'll have to talk about that a little bit later. But if you have genes coming in, genes coming out, being lost, being gained, and they're moving all over the place, can you predict patterns in the genome in the future? Well, this paper is going to say that yes, you can predict some of the value. You can predict that certain genes will always be present with other genes, and certain genes will form kind of groups that will be found more likely together than not. And so rather than being completely random, there are patterns. So even though maybe the introduction of a new gene or a new mutation might be random, what the organism does with it is not necessarily random at all with respect to genes and how they're placed near each other and the I'll say the environment of the genes. And so there's a complex ecology in the genome that if you look at thousands of genomes, which is what they've done, you start to see that there are common patterns. There are common things that happen over and over and over and over again in different lineages of E. coli bacteria, such that they find similar patterns. Similar genes end up close together and end up interacting with each other, even though they may not be directly related to one another. So that is a pattern that is noticeable, which means it's not random. All right, so that's kind of what they're finding is that there's a little less randomness to just the introduction of, you just throw in lots of genes and organisms kind of randomly hit on like good sets of genes that work together well. No, there's actually patterns where it happens again and again and again. Okay, we're not going to read this whole article because we don't need to read the article. We're looking at how information is delivered. And I'm just going to show you the whole article. I'm just going to show it to you. Groundbreaking study, a couple quotes, and these are all the same quotes that were in the other thing. And what is the end result of this? We can use this approach to synthesize new kinds of genetic constructs that would be used to develop new drugs or vaccines. Knowing what we know has opened up a whole door of other new discoveries, right? Because there's a little bit more predictability, we should be able to use this information to be able to predict what genes will be associated with each other in the future. What genes might be important for, if these 5 genes are typically all found together or in the same genome, whenever you introduce some new gene, you always end up with several other genes that end up kind of collecting there together with them. Then that helps us understand the overall ecology of that genome. And then there's there's these 4 bullet points. Those are the same 4 bullet points as the other paper. The other one just kept on going and going and going and going. You notice there's nothing else after this. That's the end of it. And in Science Daily, like other sites I checked, they have story source. Materials provided by the University of Nottingham. This link goes to the PR statement at the University of Nottingham. And they have the reference, the full reference to the journal and a link to the journal site. And then I also want to note, content may be edited for style and length, right? Because they're saying we took the information provided by the University of Nottingham and we then tailored it for Science Daily. So we might have cut a few things out and we might have added a new title, try to capture the mood of that original PR release, but we're not bound to being word for word. And so they admit they've made a few editorial changes. All right, so that's Science Daily. Now let's go to the University of Nottingham and let's look at the original source for these popular news articles. Okay, here we are. University of Nottingham. Evolution is not as random as previously thought. Now see, that's what Science Daily just took their title and shortened it. So good, all right? I'm okay with that. I'm not okay with this particular PR statement from the University of Nottingham. I don't think they did a good job of representing their own work. But the news site Science Daily did okay. A groundbreaking study, blah, blah, blah. It's in PNAS. Here's the main quote they're trying to highlight. By demonstrating that evolution is not as random as we once thought, we've opened up the door to an array of possibilities in synthetic biology and so forth. By demonstrating that evolution is not as random as we thought, meaning we never thought it was completely random. We always knew it wasn't wholly random. But now we've shown another area where it's not quite as, where you might have thought there was more randomness. You might have predicted that there could have been a random pattern of how these genes were associated with each other in the genome of E. coli. But no, we found that actually the genes, if you find gene A, gene B is often near it if it's present in the genome. And if gene C is present in the genome, there's often this other gene that is near it, right? Even if both of them are missing in another genome. And so there is a pattern there that if you look at thousands of genomes, you begin to be able to predict if this, then that, if this, then that, if this, then that. And there's like little networks of genes that are there's like a core, they're always there. Sometimes they're associated with a few other genes. But if there's this other core of genes, then there's other genes that are associated with them. So there's a pattern. The pattern means not utter randomness with respect to the organization of the genome. But I would say nobody expected the genome to be 100% random. They just found it's a little less random than originally thought. And then they talk about, here's the implications are far reaching, and there's their 4 bullet points, right? And that's where it ends. So this is, the Science Daily article is not verbatim, but it's very close to this original PR statement. All right, so that's the original article. Now let's go and check out the original paper. Okay, we've spent a lot of time already. Okay, it's I've already been going on for 40 minutes, so let's move things along a little quicker here. Here is the original paper in Proceedings of National Academy of Science. It's already been 41 minutes. We got to step this up because I want to get to a little demo of ChatGPT with this stuff. So here's the original paper. And as I said before, this is a pretty dense paper. I'm not here to explain all the ins and outs of it. Not here to explain all the ins and outs of it. I'm just going to state that those descriptions of this paper are not reflective of what's in the paper. right? There's not a one-to-one relationship between these two. What's the title here? Contingency, repeatability, and predictability in the evolution of a prokaryotic pangenome. Doesn't that just roll off the tongue? Didn't that, I mean, if they had just used that title, wouldn't you just be clicking on it right now? Like, yes, I have to know what that's about. Yeah, okay, I get it. I understand why popular news sites need to mm, summarize this in some fashion and create a title that makes you at least want to read the first paragraph and find out what's going on. But here we are at Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. And we're going to learn about contingency, repeatability, and predictability in the evolution of the prokaryotic genome. So the prokaryote is E. coli, and they're going to look at the differences in E. coli strains. So we're not looking at pangenome would be all of the different genes that E. coli has. Not in a single E. coli bacteria, right? I'm going to pluck out an E. coli out of my stomach, and I'm going to sequence it, and it has a genome, right? A circular genome, and it has a set of genes. And we call it, that's its genome, all of its DNA content. But if I pulled your E. coli out of your stomach or intestines and sequenced it, I might find out that it doesn't have the same genome. It might have an extra gene. It might be missing a couple genes that I have. And then if I take E. coli from, well, you know that not every strain of E. coli is the same, right? They have different characteristics, different properties, different abilities. Like some of those E. coli's genomes, some of those E. coli bacteria have the ability to like eat the flesh off your face. And so that's an E. coli. You're like, I don't want that, right? I don't want that E. coli, but the E. coli that's in your stomach or your intestines is plenty friendly, right? And very useful to you. And so you can imagine that the flesh-eating E. coli version, strain of E. coli must have a different genome, right? It's got a different set of genes. And so what you find out is that if you sequence lots and lots and lots of strains from humans, but also from lots of other different organisms, because they also have E. coli living with them and out in the natural world outside of organisms, what you'll find is that, you know, if I have 500 genes, right, there's other ones that have 550 genes and other ones that have 450 genes. And even the ones that another one that has 500 genes doesn't have the same 500 genes that I have. And so there is a lot more genes in the pangenome, the total genome of all E. coli. If you looked at all E. coli, or at least as many as we've sampled, because of course we haven't sampled all of them, but we've sampled a variety of E. coli strains, and you add them all together, you say like, here's all the genes. That's a lot of genes, right? It's the entire gene pool of the species E. coli. And so is there predictability among all the thousands of strains? Like if you found a strain and it had like gene A, is gene, if it has gene A, is there also a gene B, C, and D that is associated with gene A? Like gene A does something and those other three genes do kind of something that might help with that particular process, right? Satellite genes, things that are somewhat associated. Right? Not necessarily absolutely dependent. They don't necessarily have to be there. You could take them out and the organism could still survive. But are there associated genes? So are there little networks of genes? And so is it predictable? Like, oh, if strain A, if this strain has that gene, it probably also has these three other genes. And if it has this other gene in another part of the genome, it probably also has these other genes associated with it. Or is it kind of random? Because you should be asking yourself, why do different E. coli have different numbers of genes? Shouldn't all E. coli have the same genome, the same basic set of genes? Kind of like humans have the same basic set of genes. Oh, well, except that not all humans have the same genes. Right? You might have a couple extra genes, you know, and I might have a couple extra genes as well that are different than your genes. It's not a huge difference, though, between humans. But E. coli, lots of differences. And that's because E. coli can swap genes with each other. And so they can add genes and have more genes and have duplications of some genes. And they can lose genes. And they have little plasmids that carry other little bits of information that can be moved to different bacteria. And some E. coli might have 3 or 4 of those little satellite genomes that give them other properties that other bacteria don't have. And so this is where the idea of the random thing comes in. All right. If you just ask Hey, all right, we've got 1,000 strains of E. coli, and each one has a different genome. And how did they become different? Well, they accidentally lost one of their genes. They had a mutation, they lost a gene. Or they had a mutation that changed a little portion of their DNA into a brand new gene. We're not going to go down that path right now, but that can happen. And then there's the more likely event of they swap through horizontal gene transfer. That's what HGTV. That's what HGT is, right? In the very first sentence here, evolution by horizontal gene transfer and differential loss causes remarkable variation in gene content in bacterial genomes. I should have just read that sentence. Horizontal gene transfer, that is the movement of a gene from one genome to another. So they might copy a gene, move it to another genome in another bacteria, and now that bacteria has a gene maybe it didn't have before, right? Or they might take out a gene from one genome and it loses it, moves it to another genome, so now that other genome has it, the other one doesn't. Is that only random? Does that just happen randomly? Right? So is there just going to be a pattern if you look at 1,000 different strains of just random associations with it? You know, if you have this gene, it doesn't mean you necessarily have this gene because you just randomly picked it up somewhere else and they're just moving around. There's a basic core. Of course, there's a core set of sequences that E. coli has that makes it E. coli. They don't get swapped around. Like if you take certain essential genes out, it's not E. coli or it's dead, right? So there's a core that doesn't change. But then you have like this peripheral set of many, many genes that aren't absolutely essential for the life of that particular organism, but could enhance its capacities. Right? And so those are the things that are swapping and moving around. So it's like this, it's a very fluid environment. And the question was, is that just randomly happening such that you can't really predict patterns of how those other genes will be associated with each other? And so that would be one hypothesis, is that those are just random events. Horizontal gene transfer, I can't predict when that's going to happen or what gene's going to get transferred. I can't predict which mutation is going to knock out a gene or which mutation is going to bring a new gene into existence in one strain or the other. And all those seem to be random. And now what they're going to do is they're going to analyze thousands of genomes and they're going to ask, are there patterns? If you have this gene and this gene, do you also have these other ones typically? Are there statistical associations? And what they find is, yes, there are. And what they conclude is that, well, actually, it's not that surprising. Natural selection is looking at a bunch of random changes, but every time certain changes happen to bring two genes into the same genome, the two work together, those two genes work together in a way they didn't work independently to add fitness value, right? They make the organism better, and so it survives better. And so that combination works better. It is kept by natural selection. By the way, that's not random. All right? That process of selecting for combinations of genes is not random. And that is the finding here. Oh, not all the patterns of how these genes are organized in the genome are random. They've been selected for in different strains. And sure, they might happen independently many, many times in many strains, but they find similar patterns because similar patterns are better than other patterns. And natural selection is the thing that's doing that. That's not random. So yes, the mutations are random, but the process of selecting which mutations to create sets of genes that are good in certain strains is not a random process. This is not exactly unexpected. This is really cool because they showed it on a wide scale across thousands of genomes, and they were able to pick up on more subtle patterns than you could with just a few genomes. In other words, if you just look at a few genomes, it does look random. But once you do a lot of genomes, you start to see statistically significant patterns that you couldn't see before. And that suggests there is more, natural selection is playing a greater role in sculpting the genome than was originally thought, because you could propose that, again, random forces were just as responsible for a lot of the ordering of the genes and genomes. Wow, sounds really radical, doesn't it? Not really, right? It's not shocking. It's not surprising. In fact, I would say, if anything, this is expected. It's just hard to see. And that's what's groundbreaking here, is that they're able to see it and show it. Show something we actually kind of expect to see and many would predict to see. Okay, let's leave it there. I'm gonna So tempting, so tempting. But if you're hanging on with me, let's do some other things. I promised a little AI demo here. Okay, so where I am here is I am at a website called Chat PDF. Chat PDF. It's just an app, right? That's built upon Chat GTP. And so what it does is you can take a PDF, right? So you can take a paper. In this case, I took this particular scientific paper. And I just uploaded it to Chat PDF. And what Chat PDF does, let me get rid of this over here, is it says, okay, I uploaded this paper. And after I upload the paper, what it automatically does is it writes a short summary of the significance of the paper. And then it provides like several questions that you might have about the paper. But then it also offers you a prompt, right? Ask me any questions. What do you want to know about this paper? And this is a way of saying like, okay, it just read the paper for you. And now you can ask it, what did it say about X, right? I think that this paper is about a certain topic. What did it say about this topic? What did you learn about this topic reading this paper? It's not including information from all the rest of the world. It's saying, what did I learn just from this paper? Hey, welcome. This is an exciting research article on the variation in gene content within prokaryotic species, specifically E. coli strains. So first of all, this whole thing is just limited to E. coli strains itself. We're not talking about the genomes of all prokaryotes. We're just talking about how changes happen within a species. The study uses machine learning to predict the presence of variable genes, shedding light on the role of selection in gene acquisition, loss, and maintenance. The findings have important implications for understanding evolutionary dynamics in prokaryotic genomes. Right? We've helped refine a little bit about how organisms are shape-shifting their genomes and creating connections between genes in genomes. And then it suggests like, hey, you might want to ask these questions like, how did the researchers use machine learning to predict the presence? All right, and if I click that button, it would throw that question into the chat, and then it would proceed to describe. And what it's going to do is it's going to try to describe in layman's terms what the methods are. All right, which is in the methods section. I asked, how did researchers use machine learning? Oh yeah, all right, so I did this, right? I'm going to show you what I've already done. The researchers use machine learning called random forest to predict the presence of, and it goes on to describe this. And I find this tool kind of helpful. I don't use this site a lot. I just knew about it and I knew I wanted to do this demo for a particular reason in this case. But it's kind of nice because it's trying to describe that particular methodology in a different way than it does in the paper. What are the implications for studying evolutionary dynamics of prokaryotic genomes? The study's findings have important implications for understanding this. The researchers found the presence or absence of substantial sets of genes is highly predictable from other genes alone. I can predict what genes will be there if you just tell me what other 3 genes are in the genome. Oh, you've got those genes? Well, then you probably also have those. And again, we already knew, like, for example, core important genes. If you have the certain set of genes for doing cellular respiration, you almost certainly have the other ones. I can predict that very, very efficiently. That's not random. Now, here's the key question. This is the question I asked. What does this paper have to say about whether evolution is random? The paper suggests that while stochastic processes play a prominent role in evolution, stochastic processes, here's a strip of here's a genome, a circular genome of a bacteria, and it copies itself. Right? And when I get done copying it, I realize that there's 3 errors in that genome, right, compared to the original one. And it's stochastic. I can tell you that there's typically going to be 2 or 3 mutations each time. I can predict that, but I can't predict exactly where they will be. Right? I can't predict where the machine will make a mistake as it's going around the circle of copying just A's, T's, C's, and G's, because it doesn't know like this is an important gene or this is an important place in the genome. I better not make a mistake here. It's just copying A, T, C, A, G, A, T, G. The A, T, C's, and G's all look the same, right? And so you can't really predict there where the changes are going to occur. Right? That's the randomness component. Gene content evolution is not entirely random. That's the important thing that this paper discovers, that gene content evolution, what genes are there is not random. Natural selection is involved in choosing what genes are important for particular organisms. So as genes are moving around from one organism to another, which they do a lot in bacteria, the bacteria are looking at those, yeah, I could use that. Nope, don't need that. And that's obviously not random. Now, sometimes they might get a gene and they might use it, but it might not really change their they might not change their fitness. They're no more fit, they're no less fit than they were before. It's neutral. We would consider that random. That's genetic drift. They've just happened to get this particular gene and now they happen to have it. But what they discovered in this paper was there's too many patterns to suggest that it just happens to have it. These genes must have actual, importance, enough importance that natural selection is looking at them and is actually making some decisions. That was a loaded word, decisions. The study proposes that at least part of the pangenome can be understood as a set of genes with relationships that govern their likely cohabitants, analogous to an ecosystem set of interacting organisms. Therefore, the findings suggest that intergenomic gene fitness effects may be key drivers of prokaryotic evolution, influencing the repeated emergence of complex gene-to-gene relationships across the pangenome. This is a really nice description of what this paper ultimately is saying. All right, so there's a tool that helps me understand maybe a complex paper that I am not as familiar with. Let's go to another tool. Oh, by the way, the author who wrote this, or here's where, see, I'm going to get in the weeds here. Not the weeds. I'm going to get in trouble here. Here's where I think that I could ask something like this. I could ask ChatGPT to write a summary of this paper that probably would be more accurate in many cases than the person writing the PR works for these institutions. All right. And it might be a little bit flowery and more clickbaity, all right, as clickbaity, but I think might capture the sentiment of the paper better. All right. One of the problems that I started right out at the very beginning, one of the problems is that the person who's talking to the person doing the research and okay, so they're asking them how it's important. And guess what? Sure, they wrote the paper, although probably there's a bunch of authors and they don't all necessarily know everything about the ins and outs of the paper, but they all want to be salespeople, right? And they want to pitch the importance of what they've done. There's a tendency to embellish. And then the PR person is going to embellish a little bit more. Whereas ChatGPT may not embellish as much. I don't know. I got mixed feelings about this. All right. But I'm going to tell you, if science reporters don't start doing a better job, then they deserve to lose their job to AI. If AI does a better job of reflecting the real science. And that would be kind of sad because that's not necessary. It's not necessary for them to lose their jobs. It's not necessary for us to become holden to artificial intelligence doing all these jobs for us. But yeah, you got to step it up and do a better job of reporting the work. Okay, last item. Here I am in ChatGPT 4. All right, and what I have done is I said, rewrite the following for a news story and add a section about the mechanism of evolution, the evidence for evolution, and the conclusion. Right, so what I did was I took the PR release from the University of Nottingham, right? I showed that to you. That was the PR original statement. And I simply pasted that in here and I asked ChatGPT to rewrite that as a news story and add a little bit more information about the process of evolution itself. In other words, I'm trying to get it to mimic that article in earth.com. And I've only done this one time. I haven't done a bunch of iterations to see what it does. So here's what it did. New study reveals predictable patterns in evolution, unlocks potential for scientific advancements. I kind of like that, right? It didn't use the same title, right? Which, by the way, in the press release, remember it said something about, groundbreaking work about, random evolution, But then the press release itself actually doesn't use the word random. It uses the word predictability and unpredictable. And that's a much better way of putting it. There was, is this an unpredictable thing? I can't predict the order in which genes I'll find in which strains. Or is there predictability? And what they're saying is, no, we actually find there's predictability versus unpredictability. Now, unpredictability can be the result of random processes. But I like that term better. And here, ChatGPT includes the predictable. They've stressed the positive. What is the finding? The finding is reveals predictable patterns in evolution, suggesting you can continue to predict these strains will do the same types of things in the future. And that's what gives it some ability. That's what this technology does in terms of giving us ability to predict what will happen with certain proteins and shapes and other things like that. And it's predictability that allows us to design things much better. In a pioneering study published in the Proceedings of Natural Science, blah, blah, blah. All right, all this stuff is very similar to the original language because I didn't tell it to completely rewrite it, just like don't make it. I just said reshape this thing. The study's implications are vast, and then it uses its 4 bullet points, and then conclusions. All right, understanding evolution's mechanisms and evolution. Right, and then it tries to apply. I said add a little section at the end about evolution itself. The research underscores the mechanisms of evolution, highlighting how evolutionary trajectories are not solely the product of random mutations and natural selection. Instead, they are significantly influenced by the historical interplay of genetic components within organisms. That's the contingency thing. That's from the title of the original paper. This aligns with the fundamental principles of evolution, where genetic variations are shaped by environmental pressures and organisms' ability to adapt and survive. Now, what's amazing about this is some of this was not part of the original press release. Some of this is inferred in the language in the press release, but does not language directly out of the press release. And ChatGPT hasn't read the original paper. At least I don't think it has. All right. But it's still it's drawing inferences and writing about them that from my reading of the paper are pretty accurate. Moreover, this study adds to the substantial body of evidence supporting evolutionary theory. The predictable patterns observed in gene interactions reinforce the idea that evolution, while complex, follows certain rules and patterns that can be deciphered and anticipated. That is what's groundbreaking and interesting about this paper. We know it's super complex and that there are patterns, but it's hard to decipher them. We know natural selection influences all these things. That's kind of a given. That's sort of that's something we expect. But actually seeing it is what's really fascinating. It's interesting now that these patterns can be deciphered and anticipated. That's what's groundbreaking in this paper. This evidence, combined with fossil records, genetic similarities across species, and observed evolutionary genes in real time, provide a robust framework for understanding the dynamics of life on Earth. That's your general statement about how this fits into the grand scheme of evolutionary theory. And guess what? That's really similar language to what's in that earth.com article. Very, very similar to the stuff that's written at the bottom of that article, just generally about hey, here's what you need to know about evolution. In conclusion, notice that in the earth.com it said, in summary. ChatGPT loves to do that, loves to write a final paragraph that's either in summary or in conclusion. The groundbreaking research not only challenges our understanding of evolution's unpredictability, but also opens up exciting new pathways for scientific advancements across various disciplines, anchored in a deeper comprehension of evolutionary mechanisms. All right, that's blah, 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 blah. Super generic, nothing really, they're not really saying anything there. Okay, that's the fluff. That's the thing that was at the end of that earth.com article too. Not those same words. Same sentiment though. It's the same style of writing. Right, so my experiment using ChatGPT 4.0 to me replicates many of the features of how that earth.com article is altered from the original PR release. I suggest, and again, speculating here, not claiming this is what happened, saying that it looks to me like somebody could have taken that Nottingham PR release, could have shoved it into ChatGPT 4, given it some parameters to add more bulk to it. So it made it a more sort of weighty feeling article, plus, made it more clickbaity. And then they just took the output of that and shoot, threw it right up there. And if that's true, that's what bothers me the most about that paper. I don't necessarily think it's wrong if you're admitting that you're doing that, but there's no admission on the website that this has been done, right? It's published as if it's written by a person, by an editor who's doing it. So there we go. Hey, I've got a little of my frustration out. I mean, I'm still not happy about the state of science reporting. And I don't hold out a lot of hope it's going to get any better, despite my rants about it. But this is also a call to the actual scientists themselves. We need to be more proactive in how our work is being presented, right? We need to be more conscious of not overplaying our hand. And when we see our own work not being described correctly, calling it out. Now, my big sort of course is that what happens is with this stuff that gets portrayed the way it does, it falls right into the hands of people who are using misinformation, right? Who are players who co-opt this stuff. In the case of Ken Ham and others, he just fills his mind with these things and he thinks this is actually what, he has a perception of evolutionary theory and all kinds of other scientific studies that is formed by popular science. And as a result, he is waving at, and as a result, what he's doing is he's waving at windmills, right? He's trying to break down something that he's not perceiving and portraying correctly. And that's what makes him sound sillier than he has to sound. I mean, I don't think he has difficulty understanding it anyway, but it just makes it worse. Now, I want to point out that not all young Earth creationists are like that. Some of them really get into the literature and they actually understand it, and they might have a different way of interpreting that literature. But at least they understand the original literature and what that person was originally trying to point they were originally making. This is more a criticism of these, sort of, I'll say, lightweight, superficial, looking, but trying to sound deep young Earth creationists. Okay, hey, get out there, you scientists, and let's do some good science, but you got to communicate it in a better way. That's it for me. Rant over. Talk to you next time. Bye-bye.